get up in the mountains and blow on your horn. We have Avacyn's Judgement. 1 red, 1 colorless. Avacyn's Judgement deals 2 damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and or players. If Avacyn's Judgement Madness cost was paid, it deals X damage divided as you choose among any number of those creatures and or players instead. It says Madness for red and is X. This card is already just great by itself on the front side, rather on the non-Madness side. It's like a twin bolt effect, more of a fire effect, I would say. Actually, I guess those are the same things. Both are instants, and this is a sorcery. But remember, if you do Madness this, you can do it at instant speed, and damn is it hot. Damn is it spicy. If you have any decent amount of mana after Madnessing this out, you are going to do some big wham jams. This card is very splashable. More splashable if you have a decent number of discard outlets. I think this is easily first pick quality. I'm going to give this probably a 4.0, not a 4.5. It's not like a bomb or anything, but it's always just going to be great, solid. Does everything you want it to do. I'm going to give a 4.0 for Avacyn's Judgement. Moving on to the next card. Burn from Within. 1 red, X. Sorcery. Burn from Within deals X damage to target creature or player. If a creature is dealt damage this way, it loses indestructible until end of turn. If that creature would die this turn, exile it instead. So we have like a blaze effect, which these things are always great in limited, very splashable, great way to finish off the opponent in a time of need. It's honestly probably a little bit worse than the Avacyn's Judgement, but still pretty nice power level. If I gave Avacyn's Judgement a 4, this is probably closer to a 3.75, but it's still very good. Take it highly, splash it highly, just does everything you need it to do. It can kill a huge creature, and it can also just finish off the opponent in a time of need. So burn from within, decent blaze type effect. Devil's Playground, 2 red, 4 colorless sorcery. Put 4 1/1 red devil creature tokens onto the battlefield. They have, when this creature dies, it deals 1 damage to target creature or player. I'm a huge fan of this card. It does a lot of work. It's not very aggressive, right? It's going to be hard to attack in with a bunch of 1/1s this late in the game, but if you already have your opponent low, it's really awkward for them. Also, it just gives you a ton of good defensive options. These 4 1/1s effectively can deal 8 damage, right? So I think this card is easily first pickable in draft. Pretty dang good in sealed. I think this is pretty easy, 3.5. Right? It's not the card that you're most excited to open, but it's gonna do decent work every single time. All right, Devil's Playground, 3.5. And remember, the scale is out of 5. Dual Shot. 1 red, instant. Dual Shot deals 1 damage to each of up to 2 target creatures. Excuse me. There are surprisingly a bunch of X1s in this format, maybe unsurprisingly, but I think this is probably going to be worse than you think it is. It's not great. More often than not, I think I'm going to be sideboarding the second Dual Shot. I probably main deck the first, but it's not as good as a lot of the removal spells that we find in this format. It's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine. Remember, you cannot deal 2 damage to 1 creature. You have to deal 1 damage to up to 2. So you can either do 1 damage to 1 creature or 2 damage to 2 separate creatures. It's not great, but it's perfectly acceptable. Again, you're probably always running like the first in your red decks. I'm probably going to give this like a 2.0. Maybe at 2.5, very top end. Everything right now is in terms of limited, remember, so not on a constructed scale. Next up, we have Falcon Wrath Gorger, 1 red for a 2/1 Vampire Berserker. Each vampire creature card you own that isn't on the battlefield has Madness. The Madness cost is equal to its mana cost. 2 2/1s in limited, not very impressive. Sure, this does have some slight upside in a limited format. You know, turning all of your vampires into cards with madness is fine, but I don't think you're going to take this highly, and this is not a rare that you're looking to open in sealed. It's by no means a bomb. It's just perfectly acceptable. I think it's probably on the same level as Dual Shot, honestly. I'm going to give it a 2.0. It's perfectly fine. The ability is not going to do as much as you think it does. Yeah, 2.0 for me. Again, it's a red Savannah Lion with upside, but in limited, it's not going to be doing too much. So I'm perfectly fine. Give it a 2.0. Then we have a Flameblade Angel. 2 red, 4 colorless, 4/4 flyer. Whenever a source an opponent controls deals damage to you or a permanent you control, you may have Flameblade Angel deal 1 damage to that source's controller. Yowza, that's spicy. Standalone stats, 4/4 flyer for 6 in red, in limited. You know, perfectly fine. This card is going to end many a game. It's not splashable, but it's certainly bomb power level. I think I gave Avacyn like a 4.5 or a 5, so I don't think I can give this a 4.5, but I'm definitely going to give this a solid 4.0. If you're in red, you'll first pick this in draft, and you'll happily play it in sealed. You'll look to build a red deck if this is one of your red rares. Flameblade Angel, solid 4.0. Next up, we have the Gibbering Fiend. Gibbering? Gibbering Fiend. 1 red, 1 colorless, 2/1, Devil. When Gibbering Fiend enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. Pretty lackluster. Delirium. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, if there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, it deals 1 damage to that player. This card is fine. It's going to have some nice reach potentials later on in the game. Very worst case scenario, it's a Goblin Piker that pings the opponent for 1 when it enters. And again, like I said, later in the game, they're going to have to deal with it because it's so annoying. It's kind of like Nettle Drone in that aspect, or like a Tunneling Geopede. It just kind of sits there and keeps pinging the opponent late game. It's not amazing. It's not great. You're going to play this in probably every single one of your red decks just because it's decent on curve and it has some real utility later in the game. I'm going to happily give this a 2.5. I think this card is again, just fine, but not amazing. So 2.5, the Gibbering Fiend. Pretty okay, nothing exciting. Let's go on to the next one. Harness the Storm. 1 red, 2 colorless, enchantment. Uh-oh. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell from your hand, you may cast target card with the same name as that spell from your graveyard. In limited, yeah, there's probably going to be a time or two where I try to make this card work. Generally speaking, this is not going to do anything. Maybe like the fringiest corner case scenario. I think even giving it a 1 is far beyond where I should be putting it. But, you know, why not? Maybe there's one time you get 4 Avacyn's Judgments. I don't know. No, this card is pretty bad. Don't play it. Maybe if you're trying to get cute with, ooh, maybe some mill effect? Like red-blue mill. But even then, I think this card is just poop soup. Don't play it. GG. Let's move on to the next card. Which is, in fact, a Hulking Devil. 1 red, 3 colorless for a 5/2 Devil. And nothing else. You guys remember Cobblebrute? This is functional reprint of Cobblebrute. It is better than a giant cockroach. So, now we know who's better in the land of disgusting, evil things. Hulking Devils beat out giant cockroaches. I can definitely see this being played in your limited decks if you need a big beater, if you have a lot of removal. If you need it like a curve card. This card is not amazing though. I'm perfectly happy giving it a 1.5. It's going to be somewhat playable. You're not going to be happy with it. That's about it. 5/2 for 4. Packs a punch. Very frail. Trades with anything. But if it does get in, well, it's going to lava axe them every single time. I'm going to happily give Hulking Devil a 1.5 here. Next card, we have Inner Struggle, 1 red, 3 colorless, instant, target creature rather, deals damage to itself equal to its power. Well, if you use this on a Hulking Devil, it'll snap kill itself, but this card is actually pretty decent as far as removal spells go. It's true that there are a lot of creatures in this format that have bigger butts than they have power, but generally speaking, this is probably going to be a 1-for-1 removal spell, especially against a lot of the bigger bombs in the format. I mean, it kills Avacyn, it kills like the Flameblade Angel, kills a lot of the bigger things. It's potentially splashable because it's only a 1 red symbol, and it's an instant, which makes it a little bit better. You can always block with a smaller creature against a creature that is like a 3/5 or something, and then Inner Struggle to finish it off should you need to do so. It is a little bit conditional, but it's still removal. I think I'm happily gonna just give it like a 2.5 or a 3. It's again right on that borderline of good, but it's definitely playable. I think I'm gonna settle on a 2.5 for Inner Struggle. Okay, next card. Ooh, now we have a sweet one. Lightning Axe. 1 red, instant, as an additional cost to cast Lightning Axe, discard a card, or pay 5 colorless. Lightning Axe deals 5 damage to target creature. Damn! This card is great. We know that there are a ton of Madness cards in this format. A lot of good ones are in red. We know there are a lot of Graveyard Matters cards. There's also Delirium in the format. This card is going to be a very high pick and probably a pretty decent splash. You can always hardcast this for 6 mana, and in limited that's still fine. 6 mana for 5 damage to a creature at instant speed is still okay. You're happy to play that. And then if you get value off of the Madness, which I think a lot of the time you're going to try to, it just gets way, way better, right? Because the casting cost is only 1 red, so you're generally going to be able to Madness something out because you've only spent 1 mana to enable the Madness. I think this is just one of the best removal spells because of the synergies it has. I'm going to give this like a 3.5. I think this card is just great as far as removal is concerned. I would play any number of Lightning Axe in my decks, and yeah, always good. Wham bam. Next card, Magmatic Chasm. 1 red, 1 colorless sorcery. Creatures without flying can't block this turn. We've seen a lot of these type of cards before in sets. They're never very impressive. I'm more often than not sideboarding this so leaving it in the sideboard game 1 in sealed or draft. Sure, there are decks that could want this falter effect. If you're extremely aggressive or whatnot, this can definitely push in the last few points of damage, but you're never excited about this card. It's more like your 23rd card, if anything else. But it is not unplayable. I'll give it a 1.5 and say there are scenarios where it's going to be good. Especially in like werewolf mirror matches, if that should be a thing, or like transform card mirror matches. This can push through a lot of damage, but overall, not very exciting. We've seen this before. Magmatic Chasm, I'm going to give it a 1.5. This card, I actually like quite a bit. This is 1 red, 3 colorless for a 2/3. It's Pyar Hound. It's an elemental hound. It has trample, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, put a 1/1 counter on Pyar Hound. So on turn 4, you cast this out as a 2/3 trample. Like passable stats at very best. Every instant or sorcery that you cast is just going to make this better and better. And combine this with like Uncaged Fury, and you have a very, very scary creature. I think this is probably going to be a little bit of a sleeper card, because it's like you look at the card and it doesn't seem that great, but I think it's going to do a lot of work. I'm always going to be happy to play this in my red decks, given I have any number of instances sorceries. It's not great, but it can do a lot of work. I'm going to give this a solid 2.5. I'm going to give this a solid 2.5. Pyar Hound definitely can do some work, but not amazing. There you go for that. Next up we have Reduce to Ashes. This is 1 red, 4 colorless, sorcery. Uh-oh, this better be good. Reduce to Ashes deals 5 damage to target creature. If that creature would die this turn, exile it instead. Okay, So in limited formats, you're always going to play like the first of this card. You'll probably play the second. In draft, I don't think you take this too highly, but it is removal that deals with most things in the format. So I could certainly see this getting higher and higher in the pick order as the format progresses, in draft anyways. In sealed, you're probably just going to run as many of these as you open. It's very splashable. It deals with most things. Honestly, this is probably like a 3.0, maybe even a little bit higher. It's expensive, it's sorcery speed, but it just deals with most things permanently. So I'd be happy to play this. I'm going to give Reduce the Ashes a 3.0. Next up, Sanguinary Mage. 1 red, 1 colorless, 1/3 vampire wizard with prowess. This is actually not a bad card. It has a relevant creature type, vampire. It's cheap enough to where, you know, it's going to get in a few points of damage. And the fact that it's a base, a 1/3, means that it's a decent blocker later on. And if you have any combat tricks, anything like that, the prowess is kind of going to put it over the top. Yes, it's more filler than anything else, but if you're looking for a decent, okay creature on curve, especially if you're playing the Vampire Tribal, this is perfectly acceptable. You'd obviously much rather have like Olivia's Bloodsworn if you're in the Vampire deck, but Sanguinary Mage does a decent job. And again, with any combat trick, this can just eat creatures much larger than this self. I'm hesitant to give it a 2.5, but it's somewhere in between the range of 2 and 2.5, in my opinion. Again, it's not that exciting, but I think you're always going to play at least the first in your red decks, if nothing else then for curve purposes. I think I'm going to settle on a 2 though, and probably okay with that rating. Next up, Senseless Rage. 1 red, 1 colorless, enchantment aura, enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2. Madness. 1 in a red. So, cards like these I generally don't like, but the fact that it has Madness actually puts this into the range of moderate playable, in my opinion. If you have enough discard effects, this is actually okay, because it kind of turns into a permanent combat trick, right? So, you know, you have, for instance, obviously the dream is always to have the Heir of Falcon Wrath, but if you have Heir of Falcon Wrath and you can attack with it, you know, you flip it immediately, you Madness this onto it, that's a lot of damage. And there are a ton of other good discard effects in the format, so I don't think Senseless Rage is bad by any means. It's not great, but the Madness is the reason I think that this card is playable. I'm going to give this a 2.0. It's probably pretty close to a 1.5, maybe like a 1.75-ish area, but I don't think it's unplayable. I think it's definitely worse in a deck without ways to discard, but in a deck that can Madness this out, it's actually pretty okay, which is not high praise, but you know, it can do some work. Next up, Spiteful Motives. I actually like this card a little bit too. It's 1 red, 3 colorless for an enchantment aura, but it has flash. Enchanted creature gets +3/+0 and has first strike. So think of this as a combat trick that stays around, right? Like, this is going to frequently eat much larger creatures, and then your opponent's going to have to use a removal spell that they would have already had to use anyways on a creature to get rid of it, because now your creature is ginormous. Again, it's the fact that this has flash that puts it in the playable range, just like the previous Senseless Rage had Madness, which made it playable. I think on the surface, just if you take away flash, it's pretty dang bad. You know, the opponent sees it coming. It's really susceptible to removal, to 2-for-1s. But the fact that it has flash means that I think a lot of the time you are going to eat their creature, and then if they use a removal spell on your creature, you're going to only have gotten a 2-for-2, which is completely acceptable. Yes, there are going to be times where you flash this in, you try to eat their creature, and then they have a trick to 2-for-1 you and blow you out. But I think that the fact that this is a combat trick that gives first strike is actually okay. I'm going to give this a 2.5, maybe even a... No, 3 is a little bit too high. I'm going to give it a 2.5, but I think, again, don't underrate this card, You're not going to play multiples of them, but I think the first is always okay. Okay. Remember, it's an enchantment. It's not just like a combat trick. But it is like a combat trick, if that makes sense. Structural Distortion. 1 red, 3 colorless sorcery. Exile target artifact or land. Structural Distortion deals 2 damage to that permanent's controller. Card is clearly the Nutter Butters. I'm going to put this into every single red deck and probably take it around the 3 to 5 range in draft. It's just that good. 1.0. 1.0. Alright. Ulrich's Kindred. 1 red, 2 colorless for a 3/2 wolf. Trample. And you can play a green and 3 colorless. Target attacking wolf or werewolf gains indestructible until end of turn. Okay. It's a 3/2 for 3 mana, and it has trample. Stat-wise alone, that is perfectly fine. It's more of a filler than anything else, without the green. But you know that's already better than vanilla and perfectly serviceable just for curve purposes. Now, should you be in the werewolf deck and should you have access to green mana, this card goes way up. Only being able to give it to attacking wolves and werewolves, yes, is definitely a downside, but it doesn't say other, which a lot of these type of creatures do. It just says target, so you can make it self-indestructible should you need to. I think this is going to be very, very good in that deck, the red-green werewolf deck, and in other places it'll just be perfectly fine. I'm going to happily give this a 3.0. I can definitely see this card being, again, a major boon in the werewolf decks, and again, just perfectly fine everywhere else. It's not insane, but it definitely can do its work. We'll give Ulrich's Kindred a 3.0. Alright, Vessel of Volatility. 1 red, 1 colorless. Enchantment. You can pay a red and a colorless, sacrifice Vessel of Volatility, add 4 red mana to your mana pool. Again, these things are there for delirium purposes. This particular vessel is quite bad. Yes, it can pseudo-ramp you on the turn where you do use it, but generally speaking, I'm not going to play this card. You know, I'm hesitant to give anything like a 0 because I don't think anything's unplayable, but 1 is pretty damn bad. 1 is basically just don't play this card in limited, and that's what I'm going to give this. I'm going to give Vessel of Volatility a 1.0. Alright, next up we have Wolf of Devil's Breach. 2 red, 3 colorless for a 5/5 elemental wolf. 5 mana 5/5 in limited is actually, I think, above curve. Let's read what it does. Whenever Wolf of Devil's Breach attacks, you may pay a red and a colorless and discard a card. If you do, Wolf of Devil's Breach deals damage to target creature or planeswalker equal to the discarded card's converted mana cost. Well, I've never seen this card before. This card is awesome. Standalone, 5 mana 5/5 in red. Playable. Whenever it attacks, you may pay a red and a colorless and discard a card. If you do, Wolf of Devil's Breach deals damage to target creature, planeswalker equal to the discarded card's converted mana cost. Yowza! This card is spicy. Obviously, synergizes with Madness, Delirium, and other graveyard shenanigans. Also, it's just a 5/5 for 5, and you can clear out blockers with it. Holy guacamole. It isn't easy to splash because of the double red cost, but I'm going to happily give this a 4.0. Maybe close to a 4.5, honestly. It's that good. Like, stat-wise alone, it's great. The ability is great, and it has synergy. I think Wolf of Devil's Breach is an easy 4.0, maybe even closer to a 4.5. This is a card I'm always going to slam in draft, and a card that I will look to play red for if I've opened it in my sealed pool. Let's go to the other side of the red cards now. Shoop. Start things off with a little Blood Mad Vampire. 1 red, 2 colorless for a 4/1 Vampire Berserker. When Blood Mad Vampire deals combat damage to a player, put a 1/1 counter on it. Okay, so standalone stats, 3 mana 4/1 Vampire. It grows if it deals damage to a player. But it also has Madness. And again, I think Madness puts a lot of the cards that would be fringe playable into the category of, hey, this is not that bad. If you can abuse the Madness, and this Madness cost is very cheap, mind you, 1 red and a colorless is easy, then you are just getting a lot of value. And this card does pack a punch. I don't think it's great by any means, but I think in the red decks, the vampire decks, the Madness decks, this definitely has a place. I think the Madness cards all go up in value a little bit just because there's so much synergy. I'm going to happily give this a 2, maybe even a 2.5. It's probably safest to give this a 2 just because it's so frail, but again, don't underestimate the Madness cards. I think they are going to be better than you think, although it's very possible that I'm overrating them. Disclaimer. Disclaimer, it's not my fault if you lose with Madness. Dance with Devils, 1 red, 3 colorless, instant. Instant, mind you. Remember, the rare is not an instant. The Devil's Playground is a sorcery. This one's an instant. Put 2 1/1 red devil creature tokens on the battlefield. They have, when this creature dies, it deals 1 damage to target creature or player. I think this card is excellent because it's an instant, right? Flashing in 2 devils? Who does that? That's cheat. Instant is cheat. Devils are cheat. I think this is actually a pretty decently high pick up for red, and a card that's probably worse than sealed, but still pretty darn good. It's just the ambush effect. The devils themselves are quite decent. It's splashable in a pinch, although I don't know if I would splash for this card by itself. I think Dance with Devils is a fine 2.5 or a 3. Whoops, I forgot to take off the last rating. I think it's a fine 2.5 or a 3, honestly. In between there somewhere. Definitely playable. A card I will hope to wreck many people with during this format. Dissension in the ranks. This is 2 red, 3 colorless, instant. Target blocking creature fights another target blocking creature. I think this is a card that people are going to overrate. I think this card is actually quite poor. In fact, more often than not, I feel like I'm going to be sideboarding this card more than I'm starting it. In aggressive decks, sure, it has utility, but even then, like, oh, it's not going to be the blowout that you always want it to be. It's not going to kill both creatures instantly every time, right? Your opponents aren't always going to have 2 3/3s or 2 4/4s or 2 4/2s or something like that. Some of the time they're going to have a 3/3 and a 2/2, in which case you've probably gotten 2 for 2'd. Sometimes they're going to have a 2/2 and a 3/5, and then you're like, okay, well, I've killed your 2/2 and maybe I killed your 3/5. I don't think this card is good. I'm sure it's playable, but it's not going to be the card you want it to be. I'm just going to give this a 1.5, honestly. It's not unplayable, but it's a lot worse than it looks, at least in my opinion. And it's so expensive, too. Plus, it has to be blocking creatures. Like, ugh. If it was attacking or blocking, sure. Sure, it goes up. But it has to be while you're the aggressor. And if you're on the defensive, this does nothing. So, I'm going to give a 1.5 to Dissension in the ranks. Ember I Wolf, 1 red, 1 colorless for a 1/2 haste wolf, and you can pay a colorless and a red to give it +2/+0 until end of turn. So in original Innistrad there was a card called what, Feral Ridge Wolf, and that was a 1/2 trample for 3 that had the pump ability. You know, as much as I played this card during the pre-release, I don't actually think it's that great. The haste is really nice because you can just get people out of nowhere sometimes, and this does potentially pack quite a punch. But it's just very, very frail. And you don't always want to have to hold up mana. This does trade up very well, and again, the haste makes it a little bit more interesting, but I don't think it's a good card. You're not taking it highly during draft, and in sealed, it's just not very impressive either. It's probably close to a 1.5 or a 2. I think I'm going to land on a 2, but again, not amazing. you're looking for better things to do. That's true. It does have wolf synergy. Sure. But Ember I Wolf is not the wolf you're looking for. Fiery Temper. 2 red, 1 colorless, instant. Fiery Temper deals 3 damage to target creature or player, and Madness for red. This card's okay. I might play it in 1 or 2 of my red decks. It just doesn't do enough, honestly. I'm kidding. This card is great. 3 mana for 3 damage to a target creature or player is perfectly fine and limited, especially at instant speed. And the Madness is so cheap that you are going to get a lot of value off of this card and be very, very happy with it. It's not splashable on the unmadness side, but I can see playing this in a deck that doesn't run much red just because I have good discard outlets. I'm perfectly happy giving Fiery Temper a 3.5. I think this card is just very good. I'm always going to play it in sealed. I'm going to take it pretty highly during draft. Alright, next we have the Geist Blast. This is 1 red, 2 colorless, instant. Geist Blast deals 2 damage to a creature or player. 1 red, 2 colorless, exile Geist Blast from your graveyard, copy target instant or sorcery spell you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. 3 mana, 2 damage, instant. It's not terrible. It's always going to be playable in some capacity in limited. How good is the extra ability? Well, it's a little bit expensive. It's a secondary color, which is blue. But it is quite powerful depending on the other instants and sorceries you have in the deck. It's probably like a middle to early pick in draft, and you're almost always going to run this in sealed, just because it's a removal spell that can go up top as well. It's not amazing. It's nowhere close to Fiery Temper level power levels. I think I'm happy giving this like a 2.5 or a 2.0. I think I'm going to settle on a 2.0. The extra ability on the card is oftentimes going to be irrelevant. You're frequently just going to play this for 3 mana, 2 damage without any blue sources. But yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Everything's fine. Next up, we have the Gold Knight Castigator. The card I spoiled, actually, previewed. 2 red, 2 colorless, 4/9 Angel, Flying Haste. If a source would deal damage to you, it deals double that damage to you instead. If a source would deal damage to a Gold Knight Castigator, it deals double that damage to Gold Knight Castigator instead. From what I've seen of this format, it's kind of a brawl fest, and I'm scared to play this card. I'm going to play it, but I'm scared to play it. Because, yes, it packs a punch, but man, it hurts you so bad. I'm not scared of this card dying. I don't think this is going to die in combat as much as you think it would. Because, remember, they still have to deal some combination of like 5 damage or -X effects to deal with it. It's just the double damage to you is so scary. But it's a huge flyer. It has haste. It's cheap. Like, it's definitely up there. I'm not going to give it a 4.0, but I'm going to give it a 3.5. This card is going to finish games one way or the other. And I hope that I am the one either finishing the game with this, or I'm doing something to the opponent to make them take a ton of damage. Yeah, it's. I want to see how this plays out in a limited format, but I'm gonna give it a 3.5. It ends the game one way or the other. Next up, we have the Hal Pack Wolf. This card did a ton of work over the pre-release. This is 1 red, 2 colorless for a 3/3 wolf. It cannot block unless you control another wolf or werewolf. The thing is, playing a 3/3 on turn 3 in limited is quite strong. They're generally above curve, and this is usually getting in for a decent amount of damage. Combine this with any combat tricks, and it's going to do a ton of work. Plus, if you're in red, you're frequently going to have some other wolf or werewolf. And if you're in the werewolf deck, then, you know, oftentimes there's just no downside at all. I think this is perfectly fine filler if nothing else. It's never going to be excellent, but it's always going to be solid. I'm happy to give this a 2.5 or a 3. Happy to give this a 2.5 or a 3. I don't think you're going to cut this from your red decks very frequently, but it's not like a super high pick anyway. and it's not something that you're going to try to move into red for if you open it in sealed. But yeah, again, just very solid. Here's a nice one. Incorrigible Youth, 2 red, 3 colorless, 4/3 vampire, haste. How good is a 4/3 haste for 5 standalone? Well, if you guys remember Thundering Giant, the card was okay. Okay, playable, not great. But hot damn, this is my jam. Madness for a red and 2 colorless. Again, any card with Madness generally goes boop, 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 especially if it's attached to a 4/3 hasty creature. I think this card is excellent. I think it's one of the best red uncommons, if not the best red uncommon. This card is going to end games very quickly for you. Like, people will have nightmares of the turn 2 Arrow Falcon Wrath into turn 3 transform Arrow Falcon Wrath, discard Incorrigible Youths, get in for 7. Like, oh my god, not like this. I think this card is great. It's not like bomb, but it's just very, very solid. I'm happily gonna give this a 3.5. I'm happily giving this a 3.5. Because remember, when you Madness something out, you can also you can cast this on your opponent's turn with Madness. It can be a 4/3 blocker if you need. And if you're bashing your opponent with it, well, then you are probably just in good shape anyways. So happy to give this a 3.5. This card is real good. Next up, Insolent Nia Nate. 1 red for a 1/1 vampire. It has menace. And discard a card, sacrifice Insolent Nia Nate, draw a card. This card is going to vary in value depending on how many Madness cards you have. Standalone, it's not that good. If you have it on turn 1, it is going to get in for quite a few points of damage just because of the menace. So like 3. But you know, the ability to cycle it later in the game is perfectly fine if you don't have any Madness cards. If you do have Madness cards, obviously, again, it goes up in value, but this is not a card I'm going to be taking highly in draft, and it's not a card you're extremely happy to open in sealed, but I think it's perfectly playable. This is probably like a 2.0, honestly. Don't underestimate this card. It's not great, but I do think it has a home in the red decks. I think it is fine. Next up, we have, and I love this artwork, by the way. This is the Mad Prophet. This is a reprint from Avacyn Restored or something, I believe. This is 1 red, 3 colorless for a 2/2 human shaman with haste. You can tap it to discard a card and then draw a card. Hey. Hey! Well, we've been talking about discard a lot, and this card is no different. I think this card is just great. You're always going to play it in your red decks. You might even splash for this card because it is very, very powerful. It's not technically looting, it is rummaging because you have to discard a card first before you draw. But again, Madness, Delirium, Graveyard Matters cards. This card has haste, so you can always just play it as a beater if you need to. I'm happy to give this a 3.0, maybe even a 3.5 in the Madness decks. And look at that art. The art probably bumped it up to like a 3.5, honestly. Again, very happy to play this card. I think you will be happy to play it as well. Next card we have Malevolent Whispers. 1 red, 3 colorless, sorcery. Gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature. It gains +2/+0 and gains haste until end of turn. That's a lot of end of turn words on that card. Madness for 3 colorless and a red. So this is Traitorous Instinct, but it has Madness. I think this card is going to be great in the aggressive strategies, which there are going to be plenty of. In the Madness strategies, you can do this on their turn to turn it into a Ray of Command or Turn Against type effect. I guess Turn Against is better suited for the color. How good is it just on your turn? I think it's fine. Again, if you're aggressive, it's always going to find some work. And if you are able to Madness them and kind of get a 2 for 1, then you are going to be real happy with this card. I think this is 2.0, maybe even a 3.0. I'm sorry, 2.5, maybe even a 3.0. I think this card will probably surprise. It will definitely kill me more than once in this format. It's not great, but again, it's perfectly fine, and it goes way up with Madness. So I'm going to give it 2.5 to the Malevolent Whispers. Next card we have, I don't think I saw this card once during the weekend. We have Ravenous Bloodseeker. This is a 1 red, 1 colorless, 1/3 Vampire Berserker. Discard a card. Ravenous Berserker gets +2/-2 until end of turn. People were calling this the new Aquamoeba, which obvious comparisons, but this cannot flip back to a 1/3 after it turns into a 3/1. If you have ways to pump this creature's toughness, it can get really scary. For example, the Rage enchantment that we were talking about earlier. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but the +2/+2, it like goes perfectly well on this card. Plus, as a 2-mana 1/3, I've talked about it before. That's kind of fine fillerish, and the free discard plus the power boost makes this card actually quite strong. This might be a high rating, but I'm going to give this a 3.0. I think this is a card that I'm frequently going to take early in draft and try to build around with some madness theme. In sealed, it's probably not as good, but it can definitely do some work there as well. I'm going to give a 3.0 to Ravenous Bloodseeker. That's very, very high. Probably a bit too high, but I think this card is going to be nice. Nice. Remember, I have my own likes and dislikes. 1 red, Rush of Adrenaline. Instant. Target creature gets +2/+1 and gains trample until end of turn. Compare this to Brute Force in the previous format. And it's 1 red as opposed to 1 red, 1 colorless. I think this card is perfectly fine as a combat trick. You're not insanely happy playing this card, but you're going to play it sometimes. It's fine, it's cheap. It forces through extra damage if your creature has huge power, like if it's on a hulking devil. But otherwise, not that good. I'm going to probably give this a 1.5. I think giving it anything higher would be incorrect. Yeah, Rush of Adrenaline, 1.5. Next up, boop, 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 boop. Scourge Wolf. 2 red for a 2/2 first strike, Wolf Horror. Standalone stats, 2 mana for a 2/2 first strike, perfectly fine. It has a good creature type, a wolf, right? So there's some synergies that lies with it. And, hey, Delirium. Scourge Wolf has double strike, as long as there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard. So the mana cost is prohibitive, but the card is aggressive for sure. 2/2 first strike is well above curve. If you have Delirium, it's going to be a powerhouse. Combine that with, say, the Rush of Adrenaline that we showed previously, and damn, are you going to get in for some damage. There's also like the +1/+1 double strike trick. There are pump effects in red, like the enchantment, the senseless rage. There are plenty of cards that work well with this. So this card is good early, right, because it's generally going to get in, and it's good late because it has double strike. The only prohibitive thing is that 2 red mana cost. I'm going to give this a 3.0, maybe even a 2.5. It's very, very solid. I don't know how highly you're supposed to take this in draft, and in sealed it's probably a little bit worse. But overall, just you can't really ask for more from a 2-drop, and it is rare to note. So 3.0 for the Scourge Wolf. Next, we have the Sinprota. 1 red, 2 colorless, 3/2 Devil Menace. So standalone stats, 3/2 Menace for 3. That's not bad in limited. Let's read some further text. At the beginning of your upkeep, reveal the top card of your library. Any opponent may have you put that card into your graveyard. If a player does, Sinprota deals damage to that player equal to that card's converted mana cost. Otherwise, put that card into your hand. This is going to have both constructed and limited utility. In limited, this is pretty dang nice. If you play it on turn 3, it is generally going to get in for some amount of damage because of the menace, and it is just going to get you some card advantage. Now, obviously, if you reveal a land, the opponent is going to happily put it into your graveyard. But remember, this is not replacing your draw. This is at the beginning of your upkeep, so that was just an extra card anyway. And if they do put a card in your graveyard, you are further towards Delirium. They might have been some zombie if you're playing those colors. So there are reasons to why them binning it is also fine, even if they happen to bin your bomb. And, hey, if they do put something in the graveyard, they are taking damage, okay? And if they don't take any damage, then you're drawing a card. So this card is all upside for 3 mana. It's kind of close to a bomb just because of the raw card advantage that it provides. In fact, I can definitely see splashing for this card just because of that. Do I want to give this a 4 or a 3.5? It's definitely at least a 3.5. It might even be a 4.0. I'm a little bit hesitant to give it a 4.0, but I'm going to be very, very happy to give it a 3.5, and it might even be a little bit better. So Sinprota, 3.5. Next card, Sinsia Masquerade. 1 red, 2 colorless, enchantment. Attacking creatures you control at first strike. Okay. Whenever a vampire you control deals combat damage to a player, put a 1/1 counter on it. Okay. Madness. 1 red, 2 colorless. Okay. I don't think this card is good. In the vampire deck. It is probably okay. And there are times where you are going to madness this in during combat and kind of get them if you are in the vampire deck. But generally speaking, these types of enchantments are not very good. Yes, there are scenarios where it's just going to completely wreck face. Yes, that is absolutely going to happen. But those are few and far between to the norm when it is just going to kind of be meh. It does make pump effects better because it gives your creatures, attacking creatures, first strike. But otherwise, I don't think this card is very good. It's going to find a home in some vampire decks, but I'm just going to give this a 1.5 and say, better luck next time. Maybe if you're in vampires 2 or 2.5, but base alone, 1.5. It's not unplayable. It's just not going to be good frequently. Next up, Tormenting Voice. 1 red, 1 colorless, sorcery. As an additional cost to cast Tormenting Voice, discard a card. Draw 2 cards. Reprint, we've seen this card multiple times, but hey, it's now in a format where it's probably a little bit better. Madness, Delirium, Graveyard Matters, things that I've said 100 million times. And it's cheap. You're probably always going to play the first in your red decks. I don't know how many more you would play. It's not a super high pick in draft. It's common and probably goes real late. But it's also a fine card in sealed. I mean, I'm going to give this a 2.0. Maybe a 2.5 at the very, very best. It's just, yes, you're going to be able to madness some cards sometimes, and it is some nice card draw selection in red, but generally speaking, I don't think it's that impressive. So either a 2 or a 2.5 for Tormenting Voice. Next card, we have Uncaged Fury. We've been talking about this combat trick for a while without actually showing it. But 1 red, 2 colorless, instant. Target creature gets +1/+1 and gains double strike until end of turn. Very, very powerful. Double strike is always an ability that is very swingy, obviously. It only pumps the creature by +1/+1, but again, the double strike makes it very, very scary. You're not going to splash for this card, but in your aggressive decks, this is going to do a ton of work. On any trample creature, like Pyar Hound, for instance, or Ulrich's Kindred, it does a buttload of work, and sometimes your opponent just doesn't block, and you cast this and you kill them. Combine this with any other pump effects, such as Grotesque Mutation, as we saw during the pre-release, and you can very quickly kill the opponent. It's fine, it's not amazing. I'm going to give it a 2.0. Don't overrate this card, but be prepared to lose to it. Don't overrate it, but be prepared to lose to it, because it has that capability. So I'm going to give it 2.0 for Uncaged Fury. Next card, Voldar Duelist. We also saw this card do a ton of work during the pre-release. This is 1 red, 3 colorless for a 3/2 Vampire Warrior. It has haste. So 4 mana for a 3/2 haste. That's not terrible. It's a little bit frail, but again, relevant creature type, haste, yada yada yada. When Voldar Duelist enters the battlefield, target creature can't block this turn. Okay, hey. In the aggressive decks, this is going to be one of your better cards. Your opponent's going to lead back a creature thinking that they can block. All of a sudden, that creature can't block, and you're getting in for an additional 3 points of damage. I think this is just solid in the red aggressive decks. If you're a vampire, then hey, you're going to get some extra utility out of this. It's not great, it's not amazing, but it's perfectly fine. I'm happy to give this a 2.0. Sorry, 2.5. I think it's just fine. Just fine. Nothing more to be said about Voldar and Duelist. That actually wraps up the red cards. Since I'm doing this